Isn't it a fine morning? I'm loving this little cooler weather that you're having here. Reminds me of being at home in Canada. So my lesson this morning is entitled, Tell Me a Story. Don Miguel Ruiz is the author of The Four Agreements. Anybody read that besides me over and over again? It's something you just keep going back to. He also wrote another book called The Voice of Knowledge. Did you know that? And one of the chapters in this book is entitled The Storyteller. We create an entire virtual reality in our mind, and then we live in that reality. And as I read this, it brought a smile to my face and an awareness to my heart about how many stories I'm still telling out there. Hence the lesson today. Tell me a story, because if I ain't learning from it, I ain't going to talk about it. That might seem selfish, but that's the way it is. Many times we're living in a story that has been created by us without even realizing that it's a story, as the stories go. And sometimes as I tell those stories, I believe more and more. The more I tell them, the more I believe them. So are the stories I believe that I have created about everybody else true? Are we creating drama for ourselves through the stories that we tell ourselves? Well, maybe now and then, eh? I've heard of drama queens before, but have you ever heard of a drama king? Maybe that's a new word today. So the first step is to be aware of the stories that we're telling and that we have created. First of all, there are some things that are just so. The letter C is a letter C because they say so, we say so, and we agree on that. The word cat describes an animal that we've agreed to call a cat. However, almost everything else that is theoretical and intangible is what? It's a story. What is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, what is beautiful, or what is ugly. So how many of the concepts that you have about yourself or are stored in your mind are based on stories? The stories that say, I cannot do that, this is not who I am. One of those changed my life. I've been doing SCE, spiritual education and enrichment, back at my church in Hamilton, Ontario. And one night, my minister, who is Jane Simmons, she asked me to go out for dinner, so we went out for dinner, and we're sitting there, and I've been doing SCE classes and all that stuff. And she'd been asking me about doing ministerial education, and I kept saying, no, I'm too old for that. Too old. And I can still remember, she looked at me and she pointed me right at me, and she said, and what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And I thought, oh, you got me. So we never know. When we come into this body and when we come into this life, there was a whole society of storytellers that are waiting for us. And from their stories, then we learn to create our own in so many instances. Here's a story. Scott Mamaday, he's an American Indian writer, professor of literature in Southern California. He tells this story. When he was a small boy, his father woke him early in the morning and said, "I want you to get up and go with me." His father took him by the hand and led him sleepily to the house of the old squaw. And he left him there saying, "I'll be back to pick you up this afternoon." And all day long, the old squaw of the Kiowa tribe told stories to the boy, sang songs, described rituals, told the history of the Kiowa. She told the boy how the tribe began out of a hollow log in the Yellowstone River, of the migration southward, of the wars with other tribes, of the great blizzards of the buffalo hunt, then the coming of the white man, the starvation, the diminished, and finally reservation and confinement. And about dark, his father came and said to him, "Son, it's time to go." And Mama Day said, "I left her house, a Kiowa." However, sometimes we have strong opinions about who and what others should be. Does anybody else do that now and then? Oh, come on. So how many times are children encouraged to follow in their parents' footsteps? My son, who was here last week for 2 days, he lives in England, so it was great. Anyway, when he got finished high school, his father was an accountant, and so he decided to go to university to be an accountant. And he come home a year and a half later. I can still remember the time, him standing in the kitchen at one end and me at the other. And he said, I just can't do this anymore. It's not for me." Oh, okay. And about a month or so later, he hitchhiked out to California, all across Canada, down the west coast of the States. And on the way home, he met a marine engineer. He got home and he hitched again out to Calgary. And who did he meet again? A marine engineer. And he said, he come home after that one and he said, "Mom, I know what I want to do." So he went to school for 3 years, and for the past 20-something years, he's been a marine engineer. And he lives in England and he travels all over the world with this. So how many times do we think or do we feel that we know what is better for somebody else? No matter who they are, no matter how old they are. Wasn't there? Yeah. And as children, we believe our storytellers, don't we? They fill us with their knowledge, and then we use that knowledge to copy their style, and we think it's our style. We think it's our own. As kids, we see our parents, our siblings, our grandparents interact with one another, and this can become normal behavior for ourselves. So as we study of the story of our life, we can find at times in our life that everything is about me. Me. I can't sing. Me. I am the center of my universe. We don't do that in unity, though, do we? And the story is from, no answers on that. And the story is from my point of view. I really exist, but what I believe about me is a story. I have created Mary, and it's an image that's based on what I believe about myself. And then what happens? Then I project this image onto other people. Other people modify it according to their perceptions and beliefs, and then react to me according to their stories. When I was reading this, I thought, isn't conversation we have with that we have with each other interesting if we start to look at this. But really, it has nothing to do with my story. We also create an image for everyone who lives in our story. And everything that we believe about them is a story of our own creation. We meet a person, we meet somebody, and we make judgments or stories about them based on the stories. Where did those stories come from? They come from us. It's about what we believe about ourselves. And when we discover that people create and live in their own stories, then how can we judge anybody? How can we judge anybody? How can I take anything personally when I know that whatever people say about me is just a perception of their image of me? It has nothing to do with who I am. This refers to what? This refers to the second agreement in the 4 agreements, doesn't it? It does. Don't take anything personally. We should have that on t-shirts or something. This so refers, don't take, when they say, what they say about you has nothing to do with who you are, but has everything to do with who they are. And that understanding doesn't come from blame or shame or anything else, because we're each doing the best that we can do. So the key to this agreement is the awareness, understanding that each of us, every one of us, lives in our own world. We have our own movie and we have our own story. And the world we see is according to the agreements that we have made. Our opinions and our points of view come from our belief system, from all the knowledge that we have stored in our memory. And it's no one's truth but ours. Just imagine what this world, what the city would be like if we started to take responsibility for our own views of each other. When other people are speaking, then we respect what they say. We listen and we understand their words, but their stories no longer affect us. Respect yourself. Write your own story. It is our responsibility. It is our creation. And there is one way to change our story, change what we believe about ourselves, which is a big step in our awareness. The stories we tell ourselves can serve as straitjackets for stagnation or scaffolding for transformation. I will always remember the day when I was coming back from a workshop in Toronto by a speaker named Bob Proctor. I don't know if anybody ever heard of him before. Yeah. Anyway, of all the thousands of words that I heard that day, I came away with 5 words: my mind controls my body. And there were other words that followed: what I think about, I bring about. Perhaps I've shared this before, but I had stuttered for like 50 years. And I just knew in those 5 words that there was hope, that I could work through it or find out what was beneath it. So those words, that story, that changed the story of my life. Here's another story. Hugh Hare, his last name is spelled Herr. He's an avid rock climber. Got trapped in a blizzard with a partner in 1982. He was 17 years old. They got struck, for 4 days they got stuck in a ravine before they were rescued. They both survived, but the frostbite on Hare's legs was so severe that they had to amputate them from the knees down. That didn't disturb him as much as the fact that a fellow climber had lost his life while searching for him. A loss that he says motivated him to do something worldwide with his life. Hugh never lost his passion for climbing. He made it his mission in life to develop better artificial limbs. And today, Hare heads the biomechatronics research group at MIT's Media Lab. And their main mission is to develop prosthetics that seemingly integrate with the human body, just like the real limbs do. And his passion for rock climbing is even more robust now that he can change his legs. I don't like these legs. I think I like some other legs, depending on the kind of mountain that he is scaling. In fact, he says he feels quite sorry for his able-bodied fellow rock climbers, because not only is he more nimble with his artificial legs, but he can replace them when they are worn out. So as we start to change our story, then the story that we believe about others actually starts to change. They stay the same. But what we believe about them changes. The interaction with them changes. And with that change, how they perceive us also changes. Remember, I don't know if you've ever done this, but remember the ripple bowl, where we used to have a bowl of water and we used to put stones in and then watch the ripples go out? That's exactly, everybody is a storyteller. And what we share with one another is our perception. And as those ripples go out, just as we have our perception, then others will have theirs. My story is only true for me. And it's interesting to find that almost every time I tell my story in some wee little way, it changes. That's kind of good news. Ruiz writes, many times we don't see our own creation. Is that true or what? But sometime in the reflection of somebody else, then we can see our own magnificence. By experiencing the love of another person, we see how great we are, we can be. So if you and I look at our story and decide to make some changes in that story, then our second basic principle tells us the truth of who we are. Our very essence is of God. And therefore we are also inherently good. You and I are expressions of God in the human form. We know this right here and right now. We're never separate from this presence, even though at times we can think we are. And the same divine essence that Jesus had dwells in each one of us, no matter what our story is. If we create our stories from this truth, then we will give up our attachment to the dramas we create in our human experience. The stories we tell ourselves about being victims and heroes, of not being enough, and of having to be right. I can relate to that one now and then. Does anybody else? Just now and then, mind you. Excuse me. When I was reading this, but back home I also work with, I also work with people who have been incarcerated. I've been doing this for 25 years. And as we listen to their stories and to what they have experienced and to why they have ended up why they are, where they are, we don't have to understand it, maybe, And yet in their telling of the stories, we can see something of ourselves in that. We might not have followed that exact path. Might not have ended up in the same place that they have. And so our stories are, what have you learned from your experience? What are you going to do different this time that you didn't do last time? And that doesn't come from a place of judgment, I hope not, but comes from a place of love and understanding. Because I think we can all relate in some way when we hear stories like that. Our first basic principle, what does that tell us? That tells us that everything is God. And with that understanding, we know there is no part of ourselves that is not divine. Eckhart Tolle, in his awesome book, A New Earth, writes these words about the steadying influence of the Christ within. Jesus speaks of the innermost I am, the essence, identity of every man and woman, every life form, in fact. He speaks of the life that you and I are. Some Christian mystics, he writes, have called it the Christ within, so I guess we're mystics, aren't we? Buddhists call it your Buddha nature. For Hindus, it is Atman, the indwelling God. And when we're in touch with that dimension within ourselves, and being in touch with it is really our natural state, not some miraculous achievement, then all of our actions and our relationships will reflect the oneness with all life that we sense deep within. And this is love. Love and do what you will, said St. Augustine. Words cannot get much closer to the truth than those. And as the Apostle Paul said, Christ in you, your hope of glory. This is our story. You and me. This is who you and I are. So let us tell our story from this truth, from this awareness, and tell it to ourselves over and over and over again, so that it may become a deep knowing in our hearts. And for this truth, we are eternally grateful. And so it is. Amen.